Well, it's that time of year again, and we had our first hard freeze the other night, and now I'm faced with the same question as millions of other Americans. What am I going to do with all of these leaves? Well, the best thing I can do is to take the lazy way out and just leave them. That would be the best thing for me, for wildlife, for the yard, but the neighbors might not like that, and a lot of people have that mentality of I got to get these leaves out of here to make my yard look pretty and clean, just like my neighbor's yard. So another thing I can do is move the leaves somewhere where it's not going to cause anybody a kind of a, I don't know, inconvenience, I should say. So like a wooded area, I could take them to a wooded area. I could take them to a place in my pasture where it's not going to affect anything, just out of state or out of sight, out of mind kind of mentality. But if you leave the leaves, it not only kind of protects your soil with, you know, water retention, it keeps moisture in the soil, it keeps the ground warmer, and with that, it actually helps with a lot of wildlife. A lot of wildlife species will overwinter in leaf litter like this, either as cocoons for butterflies and moths. Beetles will stay in it. In wooded areas, rodents, small rodents will overwinter in it. Just all kinds of wildlife. Even some bat species that don't migrate will use leaf litter as a winter refuge. So the best thing to do is just to leave them. But if you're like right here in the middle of town, you don't have other options, maybe you're in HOA and they require you to get rid of all your leaves, then I'm going to show you some other things that you should do with your leaves. Don't just throw them in the dumpster. Throwing them in the dumpster is the worst thing you can do. When organic matter like leaves, grass clippings, uneaten food goes to the dump or into a landfill, it actually causes methane gas. It's a process that is developed by anaerobic bacteria. Anaerobic bacteria uses low oxygen environments like a landfill, and the byproduct of them decomposing the organic matter is just awful smells. It's a slime, and it produces methane gas, and methane gas is a more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide can be used by plants, again, in photosynthesis, whereas methane cannot. So I'm going to show you a few things that we can do with all of these leaves other than just leave them where they are. There are several things we can do. So let's get into the different ways you can use these leaves. Now, one thing I did mention with the leaves is you can move them to an area where they're not going to cause any eyesores, is pretty much the only thing that they would do. So what I'm going to do is move some of these to an area where they're not going to cause a problem. But if you're going to choose to do this, don't mulch them up, don't run them over with a lawnmower, just in case there are actually butterfly or moth larvae or cocoons or adults in here. You don't want to chop those up if you're doing this for wildlife reasons. So that's what we're going to do with a few of these, and I'll show you what to do with the rest. Definitely going to need more barrels. Now, something else you can do with your leaves is to compost them. If you choose to compost them, you can use them in your garden, in your flower beds, in your raised gardens. I have stock tanks that I grow potatoes in, and leaves make great compost. Think of a tree. Every year, these tree roots go deeper and deeper and wider, unlocking nutrients that have been locked away maybe hundreds, even thousands of years. And they're bringing them up to the leaves, and when the winter hits, they start pulling back a few of those nutrients back into the tree for the tree to have an early spring or a better start in the spring. But a lot of those nutrients are still in these leaves. So one thing to do is to increase the surface area through the mower process, and you get stuff like that. And that's easily, or speed up the composting process. So you can compost these and add them to the garden next spring and summer, adding a lot of nutrients to your garden. If you don't have a garden, or you don't have flower beds, I recommend you start. But if you don't, but you have leaves and you don't want to just throw them in the dumpster, then have your friends who do compost say, hey, I got all these leaves, do you want them for your compost? Who's going to say no to free fertilizer? I'm going to compost a lot of these. These fell pretty much overnight, so I'm not too worried that there's going to be a lot of moth or butterfly larvae or cocoons in these, because they haven't been sitting long enough, because we were 80 degrees and then all of a sudden we went down to 19 and they just fell pretty much overnight. So that's what you can do. So I'm going to start the mower and start mulching up some of these leaves. Oh, come on. Maybe. Just look at that. That's going to be good compost in the pile. This stuff right here, that's all last year's leaves that have accumulated at the bottom of the compost pile that I haven't used yet in my garden or my flower beds. Now, you don't want to compost full leaves. You don't want to just rake these up and throw them in a pile, because if they're full, if there's still a full leaf, it's going to take, one, it's going to take a long time to compost down and break down for usable compost. And two, they're going to form what's called a leaf barrier. And it's going to, like I said, not break down as easy. And it's going to take almost years for it to decompose completely. But if you chop them up like that, they compost rather fast. So I'm going to keep going. So in nature, leaves kind of act as a suppressant as well for the tree. So when the tree drops all of its leaves, they form this thick mat of leaves that kind of suppresses other plants from growing directly underneath the tree, and that helps the tree with competition for water and nutrients. And it saves you money. It's a free source of fertilizer. It saves you money from not having to go to the store to buy fertilizer, to buy compost. And that's another benefit to this. If you compost your own leaves, if you make your own compost, and don't have to buy compost from the stores, you're avoiding the potential spread of invasive species. Some compost companies, they compost stuff like weeds and other stuff like that, and you don't know where those seeds are coming from, and then you introduce them into your area, and that's another way invasive species have spread throughout the United States and throughout the world. Turn these into this. Well, maybe you don't have room for a compost pile, or you just don't want that kind of scenery around your house or in your alley. So another thing you can do is dig a trench like I am here in your garden area, about 8 to 10 inches deep, maybe a little deeper depending on how many leaves you have. But once you have your leaves in here, or your leaves and your trench dug, you can bury them and you still get that fertilizer, and with the added benefit of soil moisture retention. The buried leaves will act kind of as a aquifer, a little miniature aquifer or a reservoir of water for your plants next year if they haven't decomposed. I'm doing this in the fall. You can do it in the spring as well, and it will still act as a reservoir. But if you are one of those people that want to get rid of your leaves in the fall, this is the way to do it. This is adding fertilizer, it's adding organic matter, it's adding benefits to your garden area as this. And I want to say I do this with all of my old pepper plants and old tomato plants as well. You bury them deep enough that it's going to decompose and add nutrients to your soil. It's going to add organic matter to your soil in your garden. But then there's other people that say, well, I just don't have time to do this. Well, then if that's the case, then you are one of the people that just needs to leave leaves. And most people pay to have this kind of exercise of digging a trench in their garden. You're going to get exercise, make you healthier. You're going to be outside on a gorgeous day like this in the fall. You're going to be adding nutrients and other benefits to your garden for next year. I just don't see any downsides to this. So I'm going to keep at it because I got running out of daylight and I have a lot more work to do. Another thing, I just saw a giant earthworm in here. He's in there. Worms love organic matter. So the more you feed the worms, the more worms you're going to have in your garden, the healthier the soil is going to be, the more microbes they're going to invite. So again, I see no downside to saving your leaves. I see a lot of downsides to just throwing them in the garbage can. I mean, you're getting rid of fertilizer, you're harming wildlife. All right, I finally got my trench dug the way I want it. This is where I put my tomatoes usually. So I'll do the same thing over there where I keep my cucumbers. I just gotta clean up everything, but I got a bag of leaves here. So I'll show you right now that just to put it in the trench. You don't want to get it too yeah, that'll be good. Oh, there's an earthworm right there. He'll love that. He'll love these leaves. Okay. Trench full of leaves. Now you just fill it in. Just fill it in. Big old earthworm. And by the time spring gets here and I plant my tomatoes right there, that'll be some nice rich soil. Catfish bone. I also bury the fish I catch in the garden too. Not much goes to waste around here. Now the final thing I do with leaves is I just mulch it right into the yard itself. If they're not thick like they are right here, then you can just mulch it right into the grass. This is going to act again as a water saver. It'll help with water retention for your grass, reducing your water needs. It's going to act as a natural fertilizer for the grass when it breaks down in the spring and the summer. So it is a win-win situation for both your yard, you, and all the other things that I've mentioned before. So I'm going to do that. So here we go. So those are just some things that I do with my leaves on my property. If you do something different, please let me know on the comments. I would love to know what everyone else does with their leaves. I really hope you learned something, and I hope you got some ideas on your own property of what to do with your leaves other than just throwing them into the dumpster. If you did enjoy something, if you did learn something, I would really appreciate a thumbs up and a subscribe if you didn't already. But until I see you again, plant native and drink local.